I found this kind of interesting image of Saint-Germain. There's the obvious, very famous portrait of him, and it seems to be superimposed over this kind of, looks like might have been a mural depiction, very kind of stylized artist's interpretation of the French Revolution with all its horrors there in the background, and he seems to be emerging as a figure of light when many say that he was one of the, I wouldn't say instigators because that's not a fair characterization, but certainly an exponent of freedom, and in the lead up to the French Revolution, and then perhaps one of its authors. But certainly we see in the background that the French Revolution took a very dark turn and went in a direction that was very antithetical to the nature, the spirit of Saint-Germain, as I think we can fairly assess his spirit, I think, at this point, without getting too metaphysical. But speaking of metaphysics, there's certainly, my God, how this single person has inspired and spawned so much metaphysical speculation and I think, kind of unbelievable claims, just over the top. And I think most of this began to be whipped up around this remarkable person in the late 19th century. For instance, the notion that he was the reincarnation of Francis Bacon. And I'm taking this from a website called ascensionresearch.org. I'll put the web address in the show notes. And I don't mean to belittle or ridicule. I just have to express incredulity. And I would prefer at this point if people would suspend judgment and simply take note of the incredible amount of lore that has been built up around Saint-Germain, and just take it as kind of evidence of what must have been a very powerful, remarkable spirit, and also it attests to the effect he had on the people with whom he came into contact during the time that we can vouch for through historical documents and corroborating witnesses, contemporaries. But we can go to Ascension Research to read this remarkable assertion that he was reincarnated from Francis Bacon. And of course, the first question for me comes to my mind is, how do we know that? How does that work exactly? You know, I am a complete believer in reincarnation, mostly because having been in Mongolia for a few years now, stories of reincarnation, I've come into contact with many children who profess that they remember their past lives. Some of them remember them vividly and talk about them, very young children. And I have no reason to believe that they're faking it or that anyone's told them about past lives, but they talk about them, and it's kind of funny and magical when they talk about it. And then I've talked to older young people, teenagers, and I will talk to them and I'll say, in Mongolia, I've talked to several very young children, or these children come up to me and tell me about past lives, and then I've had my teenage students say, "Oh yes, yeah, one of them said, she said, I'm my own great grandmother," and I said, "Really? How does that work?" And she said, "Oh yes, when I was very, very young, I went to my great grandmother's hometown with my grandmother, and they had some of her belongings there, and I pointed to them and I identified them and I said that they were mine, and I talked about the family. And my grandmother said, the only explanation for this is that you must be my mother. You must be your own great grandmother." And in Mongolia, that's just kind of accepted and as part of life. And it's very common for people to be reborn into the families that they came from. And then I've had just a bunch of stories. I won't get into them all now, but it has made a complete believer of me. And so I don't doubt reincarnation. I just don't. It seems a bit too mechanical, and the mechanisms whereby they're trying to explain this seem to me to be describing a kind of sequence of events that is kind of pieced together by people who desperately want to believe in something. So that is my hesitation about all this. Although, again, I'm looking for the truth, and so I'm trying to be open-minded. I'm just saying this is my opinion. But the reason how this kind of how it kind of happened, according to them. This is from ascensionresearch.org. And it says, it's listing previous incarnations of Saint Germain. And the incarnation previous to the one that is the subject of this series, Francis Bacon, 1561 to 1626. Francis Bacon, born in England, philosopher, statesman, essayist, literary master, author of the Shakespearean plays. Now, this actually makes me rather angry when people contest the fact that Shakespeare wrote his own plays, because I studied theater and studied Shakespeare in depth and acted Shakespeare. And I can tell you that you have to be a person of the theater in order to write a play. It's not just, you can be a genius nobleman and concoct all of this out of your from a superior intellect or even spiritual insight. It doesn't work that way. Shakespeare was a man of the theater. He was an actor. He ran a theater. His works are extremely theatrical. It is not the same as ordinary writing. It is not poetry. It is not prose. It is not dissertation. Theater is theater. And I think there's been a great deal of effort to discredit Shakespeare because he was actually a very political figure. And he was forever warning in encoded messages in his plays. His choice of subject matter were always kind of mirroring the current situation in England and warning the Queen about the plots being laid by the Venetian party and to watch out for these essentially international bankers and their agents and their intentions, warning about their intentions and their activities. And he did indeed spend considerable time in Italy, and he knew quite a lot. And so I think it's for that reason. I think people don't wish to know. And in fact, I believe this effort to discredit him emanates kind of from the same kind of ideological swamp that the efforts to discredit Saint-Germain came from. So I'm not buying this. Shakespeare wrote his own damn plays, okay? But anyway, let's go on here. It says, continuing on about Francis Bacon, father of inductive science and herald of the scientific revolution, Francis Bacon made it appear that he died on Easter Sunday, April 9th, 1626, and he even attended his own funeral in disguise. Kind of like George Floyd, right? No mention of how he made it appear that he died. Francis crossed the English Channel and secretly traversed in disguise after 1626 through various areas of Europe with the assistance of the Brotherhood of Light. I would like to get their assistance, I tell you that. He continued to write under pseudonyms, as he had done before 1626, continuing to write as late as 1670, using the pseudonym Comte de St to write a treatise about the pranic life forces of nature. He traveled secretly to this is how it worked, okay? He traveled secretly to Transylvania, to the Rákóczi mansion, where he continued preparations for his physical resurrection and ascension under the direct training of the Master R, great divine director, it says in parentheses. The Master R kind of sounds like 80s rapper. He had incarnated in that area a number of times in previous lifetimes and felt particularly at home there. Well, we have no way of knowing that, but this is trying to make the pieces fit, I suppose. Since Francis Bacon was sighted in the area at various times over the following decades, some local people speculated that he might be a member of the Rákóczi family, possibly related to Prince Ferenc Rákóczi of Transylvania, not wanting to leave humanity in the physical octave without his direct visible assistance. Francis asked the karmic board for a special dispensation. It's kind of like a cosmic bureaucracy, I suppose, or Politburo of some kind, to allow him to function publicly in a physical, tangible resurrection body among embodied mankind. He was granted his request. They stamped his proposal. And on May 1st, 1684, Francis illumined and raised his lower bodies with full Christ mastery of the forces of nature, thereafter functioning in his resurrected body. So that's how it worked, in case anyone's curious. There's like a kind of a bureaucracy. You go before them with your proposal for reincarnation, and they approve of it, and then you're happy because you can continue to remain with the human race somehow. So then Francis then became the wonder man of Europe. That now we know Saint-Germain, right? In the 1700s, working with embodied individuals in Europe, England, and America to further the cause of freedom and the advancement of learning. He used various pseudonyms such as Count Saint-Germain, Marquis de Montferrat, Comte Bellemare of Aimar at Venice, Chevalier Schörning in Pisa, Chevalier Weldon at Milan and Leipzig, Comte Soltikoff in Genoa and Leghorn, Graf Zarogi at Dresden, and Comte de St. at Paris, The Hague, London, and St. Petersburg. He developed a reputation of being an outstanding chemist, scholar, linguist, musician, artist, and diplomat. He worked behind the scenes to try to establish a United States of Europe and to prevent the bloodshed of violent revolution. His powers included bilocation, to be two places at once, I suppose, and that would be useful. Appearing at court and then dissolving his form at will, removing flaws from diamonds and other precious stones and precipitating an elixir that prevented aging. He was ambidextrous and could compose simultaneously a letter with one hand and poetry with the other, or two identical pieces of writing with each hand. He visited Marie Antoinette and her intimate friend, Madame d'Adhémar, who later wrote the story of his abilities as an adept and that he had warned of the coming debacle and death of the king and queen. This much could be fairly substantiated, I would say. He also worked behind the scenes with George Washington and Benjamin Franklin to establish the United States of America. And that part we will work on a little later, looking for evidence, corroboration, documentation. Between 1790 and 1875, Francis completed his ascension, becoming the Ascended Master Saint-Germain. Soon after, the office of Chohan of the Seventh Ray was transferred to him from Kuan Yin. I don't know anything about that. Saint-Germain is now known as the God of Freedom for the Earth, and since May 1st, 1954, the hierarch for the dawning golden age in his current Aquarian age cycle. In this current Aquarian age cycle. The name Saint-Germain is the name that Francis Bacon chose as his ascended master name upon his physical ascension. It comes from the Latin Sanctus Germanus, meaning holy brother. Yes, but we know that Saint-Germain took that name because in San Germano in Italy, he spent time as a child, as a boy, so like brother, saintly brother, it wasn't chosen by Francis Bacon. Other nicknames or other names for Saint-Germain, also known as God of Freedom, and I think that's the title that intrigues me the most and makes me most interested in this whole project. And then the very remarkable, also known as AKA Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam. Saint-Germain was Uncle Sam. How did that happen? Then Chohan of the Seventh Ray, Lord of the Seventh Ray, Hierarch of the Aquarian Age. And it lists his divine qualities as freedom, mercy, forgiveness, ceremony, sacred ritual, justice, and alchemy. And then his divine ray and sacred fire, violet flame, violet ray, purple flame, purple ray. Fascinating. Yeah, okay, so I'm certainly not happy about this Francis Bacon as Shakespeare, or some of the other things seem to me to be products of the overheated spiritualist imagination of the 19th century. But there you have it. It just shows you how this personality generated from within itself so much speculation and adulation and adoration. So let's get back to our text. And here we are, Marquis Saint-Germain, Der Wundermann, the Comte de St. The Secret of Kings by Isabel Cooper-Oakley. We're moving on now, page 21. We find him next in England during the Jacobite Revolution of 1745. Suspected as a spy. This has nothing to do with the Jacobins. The Jacobites were associated with James II, who was driven from the throne, James II and Seventh. During the 1688 so-called Glorious Revolution, in which the House of Orange and financial interests took hold and in England, invaded, in a sense, and replaced the homegrown monarchy with something else entirely. So you had, at that time, Charles Edward Stuart, who was agitating and leading rebellions and hoping to restore the legitimate monarchy. That was the Jacobite Revolution at 1745 that was unsuccessful. So during the Jacobite Revolution, Saint-Germain was suspected as a spy and arrested. Two interesting extracts here can be quoted. The first is from Horace Walpole's amusing letters to Sir Horace Mann, the British envoy at Florence. Horace Walpole was, I guess, kind of a popular writer. His father had been a famous parliamentarian. And he was quite a clever social satirist and man about town, I suppose. Writing on December 9th, 1745, Walpole, after relating all the excitements produced by the revolution, says, "The other day they seized an odd man who goes by the name of Comte de St. He has been here these 2 years and will not tell who he is or whence, but professes that he does not go by his right name. He sings and plays on the violin wonderfully, is mad, and not very sensible." Interesting. Interesting little portrait. One wonders if Saint-Germain, in an effort not to be to seem formidable or serious, maybe perhaps he played up the kind of, I don't know, could be slightly manic or artistic side of himself in order to sort of disguise his more serious purposes, or that he was simply so prodigiously talented in so many things and also so well connected that he attracted a certain amount of jealousy, that this was the perception of him. Perhaps it's an English perception, conditioned by English manners and such. I don't know. The second reference to this stay in England may be found in Reed's Weekly Journal, or British Gazetteer, May 17, 1760, and is as follows. "The author of the Brussels Gazette tells us that the person who styles himself Comte de Saint-Germain, who lately arrived here from Holland, was born in Italy in 1712. He speaks German and French as fluently as Italian and expresses himself pretty well in English. He has a smattering of all the arts and sciences, is a good chemist, a virtuoso in music, and a very agreeable companion. In 1746, 1745, according to Walpole, he was on the point of being ruined in England. One who was jealous of him with a lady." That's an interesting aspect of his life we haven't yet delved into, although I found some material that kind of fleshes out, if you will, this aspect of his life. He was a man. He was a passionate man. One who was jealous of him with a lady slipped a letter into his pocket as from the young pretender. So sneaking a damning document. We don't know if it's obviously forged. Pretending a document that was intended to be perceived as a missive, a letter from the Charles Edward Stuart, thanking him for his services, I suppose as a spy, and desiring him to continue them. So somebody who's framing Saint-Germain because of jealousy, and immediately had him taken up by a messenger, so had him arrested. His innocence being fully proved on his examination, he was discharged out of the custody of the messenger and asked to dinner by Lord H. It says here probably Lord Stanhope, Earl of Harrington, who was Secretary of the Treasury and Treasurer of the Chamber at this date. He died 1760. Those who know him will be sorry, says Monsieur Maubert, to hear that he has incurred the Christian king's displeasure. This last paragraph alludes to what occurred at a later period. After this date, 1745, it seems that Monsieur de Saint-Germain went to Vienna and spent some time in that city, and in 1755 went to India for the second time, as we gather from a letter of his writing to the Graf von Lamberg, to which we shall refer again later on. I am indebted, he writes, for my knowledge of melting jewels to my second journey to India in the year 1755 with General Clive, who was under Vice Admiral Watson. On my first journey, I had only a very faint idea of the wonderful secret of which we are speaking. All the attempts that I made in Vienna, Paris, and London are worthless as experiments. The great work was interrupted at the time I have mentioned. Every writer, adverse or favorable, mentions and lays stress on the wonderful power of improving precious stones that was possessed by Monsieur de Saint-Germain. Indeed, almost every sort of art seems to have been more or less known to him, judging by the many testimonies that we have on these points. Our next date, 1757, brings us to the period which is best known to the public. Monsieur de Saint-Germain was introduced at Paris by the then Minister of War, Marshal and Comte de Belle-Île, but, as we have seen from the records already cited, neither Monsieur de Saint-Germain nor his family were unknown to Louis XV. Indeed. Hence, we do not wonder at the cordial and gracious reception with which he met, nor can we be astonished that the king assigned him a suite of rooms at this royal chateau of Chambord. There was a laboratory fitted up for experiments, and a group of students gathered round our mystic. Among these we find the Baron de Gleichen and Marquis d'Urf, and also the Princess of Anhalt-Zerbst, mother of Catherine II of Russia. Madame du Genlis, speaking of him at this period, says, he was well acquainted with physics and was a very great chemist. My father, who was well qualified to judge, was a great admirer of his abilities in this way. Monsieur de Saint-Germain would never consent to give up his secret. Madame du Houssaye relates in her memoirs an interesting instance of his knowledge of precious stones. The king, says she, ordered a middling-sized diamond which had a flaw in it to be brought to him. After having it weighed, His Majesty said to the Comte, "The value of this diamond as it is, and with the flaw in it, is 6,000 livres. Without the flaw, it would be worth at least 10,000. Will you undertake to make me a gainer of 4,000 livres?" Saint-Germain examined it very attentively and said, "It is possible. It may be done. I will bring it to you again in a month." At the time appointed, the Comte de Saint-Germain brought back the diamond without a spot and gave it to the king. It was wrapped in a cloth of amianthos. I don't know what that is. Amianth, does anyone know? I will look it up. Which he took off. The king had weighed it immediately, found it very diminished. His Majesty then sent it to his jeweler by Monsieur de Gontaut, without telling him 9,600 livres for it. The king, however, sent for the diamond back again and said he would keep it as a curiosity. He could not overcome his surprise and said Monsieur de Saint-Germain must be worth millions, especially if he possessed the secret of making large diamonds out of small ones. I don't understand. He said he found it diminished. That to me seems to say that the diamond was a good deal smaller. But see, there are so many mistakes in this text, it's hard to know. If someone can penetrate this, please send me a note. The Comte neither said that he could or could not, but positively asserted that he knew how to make pearls grow and give them the finest water. The king paid him great attention, as so did Madame de Pompadour. Monsieur de Quesnoy once said that Saint-Germain was a quack, but the king reprimanded him. In fact, His Majesty appears infatuated with him and sometimes talks of him as if his descent were illustrious, which it was. But I suppose it was important to keep that largely a secret. One fact in this Parisian period must not be omitted. It appears from statements made by Madame de Hossé. Herr von Barthold and the Baron de Gleichen that a young Englishman, at that time resident in Paris, Lord Gower by name, used to amuse himself and other idle people by passing himself off as Monsieur de Saint-Germain, so that most of the silly and foolish tales about him which ran riot in the gossiping salon of the period originated in the sayings of this idle fellow. This was that comedian, I suppose, who used to pretend to be Saint-Germain and make up ridiculous stories, and I suppose he was so good at it that these stories ended up being filtering through the social ether, and people misinterpreted them as actual Saint-Germain anecdotes. Various details of his doings are to be found, but they are not worth further notice beyond the fact that Monsieur Saint-Germain had to bear the blame for utterances which did not originate with him. Says Herr von Zuppenstein, many of the wild stories had probably nothing to do with Monsieur de Saint-Germain and were invented with the object of injuring him and making him ridiculous. A certain Parisian wag known as Lord Gower was a splendid mimic and went into Paris salon to play the part of Saint-Germain. Naturally, it was very exaggerated, but very many people were taken in by this make-believe Saint-Germain. So that just borders on slander or libel. Somebody may be directed to diminish the stature of Saint-Germain in the social circles by passing himself off as Saint-Germain and doing over-the-top impersonations and making up stories. Very, very scandalous. I think it's just terrible. Meanwhile, our philosopher worked on those with whom he was able to help and teach in various ways. In 1760, we find him sent by Louis XV to The Hague on a political mission. The circumstances are variously told by different writers. In April 1760, we find Monsieur de Saint-Germain passing through East Friesland to England. Next, in the London Chronicle of June the 3rd, 1760, we have a long account of a mysterious foreigner who had just arrived on England's shores. It is also said by one writer that he was well received at court, and many papers of the period mention him as a person of note to whom marked attention was paid. The Gazette of the Netherlands, January 12, 1761. The Hague, January 2nd. Letters from Paris state that when starting for this country, to which he came without asking permission of the king, Monsieur de Saint-Germain returned his red ribbon, but it is practically certain that he has an understanding with the King of Denmark, which is certain that he did. The so-called Comte de St. is an incomprehensible man of whom nothing is known, neither his name, nor his origin, nor his position. He has an income, no one knows from whence it is derived. Acquaintances, no one knows where he made them. Entry into the cabinets of princes without being acknowledged by them. So, very casual, accepted into the highest circles without question. And people are puzzling about that. People who are obviously not in the know. In the British Museum, there are pieces of music composed by the Comte de St. on both his visits, for they are dated 1745 and 1760. It was said everywhere by enemies as well as by friends that he was a splendid violinist. He played like an orchestra. There is one most interesting souvenir of Monsieur de Saint-Germain, which we have had the good fortune to see. It is preserved in the library of the grand old castle of Rodnitz in Bohemia, property of Prince Ferdinand, maybe? Von Lobkowitz, probably Ferdinand. I've never seen Ferdinand. So many mistakes in this text. Among the manuscripts and other treasures of that rare collection, we found a book of music composed by Monsieur de Saint-Germain, from which, by the gracious permission of the present prince, we have traced the inscription and autograph. It runs thus: Pour le prince de Lobkowitz, musique raisonnée, salon de bon sens aux, I don't know, langois qui est aimant du vrai goût cet art. Paul de Saint-Germain. The first letter or letters of the signature are quite undecipherable, although they have been most carefully traced for us by the librarian at Rodnitz. The first letter or letters of the signature are quite, let's see, we next have to pass on to St. Petersburg, where, according to the words of the Graf Gregor Orloff of the Margrave of Brandenburg-Ansbach, Monsieur de Saint-Germain had played a great part in their revolution. He is mentioned as having been in St. Petersburg by another writer, or rather in an anonymous book, the translation of the title which runs thus: A Few Words About the First Helpers of Catherine II. Oh yes, okay. I think this is pretty well substantiated. The writer has other details in her possession, but as fragments it is better to wait for more accurate information, which she hopes to procure. Various hints, however, lead us to suppose that Monsieur de Saint-Germain passed some time in Russia. As we have noticed already, he had this Russian general's uniform. My goodness. As we have noticed already, the Princess of Anhalt-Zerbst, the mother of Catherine II, was very friendly to him. Indeed, he passed much time at her house in Paris. However, in 1763, we get a very deeply interesting account of our philosopher in the shape of a letter from the Graf Karl Cobenzl to Prince Kaunitz, the prime minister. The details it gives are so interesting that it is better to quote it in full. Let's check our time here. Okay. I think we'll do this and then... Oh, it's quite long. Quite long. But I think we won't get through the whole thing, but get through some of it because it's very, it has the texture of the times in it. Graf Karl Cobenzl to Kaunitz. It was about 3 months ago that the person known by the name of Le Comte de St passed this way and came to see me. I found him the most singular man that I ever saw in my life. I do not yet precisely know his birth. I believe, however, that he is the son of a clandestine union in a powerful and illustrious family. So, a very polite way, perhaps, of saying illegitimate, but undeniably aristocratic, a clandestine union in a powerful and illustrious family. Possessing great wealth, he lives in the greatest simplicity. He knows everything and shows an uprightness, a goodness of soul worthy of admiration. Among a number of his accomplishments, he made, under my own eyes, some experiments of which the most important were the transmutation of iron into a metal as beautiful as gold and at least as good for all goldsmiths' work. The dyeing and preparation of skins, carried to a perfection hitherto unknown, the like dyeing of woolens, the dyeing of wood in the most brilliant colors, penetrating through and through, and the whole without either indigo or cochineal, and with the commonest ingredients, and consequently at a very moderate price. The composition of colors for painting, ultramarine, is as perfect as is made from lapis lazuli. And finally, removing the smell from painting oils and making the best oil of Provence from the oils of Navette, of Colza, and from others, even the most. I have in my hands all these productions made under my own eyes. I have had them undergo the most strict examinations, and seeing all these articles, a profit which might mount up to millions, I have endeavored to take advantage of the friendship that this man has felt for me, and to learn from him all these secrets. He has given them to me, and he asks nothing for himself beyond a payment proportionate to the profits that may accrue from them, it being understood that this shall be only when the profit has been made. As the marvelous must inevitably seem uncertain, inevitably maybe seem uncertain, we don't know. I have avoided the 2 pints which appeared to me to be feared, the 2 points. So the first of being a dupe, like maybe I'm being tricked, and the second of involving myself in too great an expenditure, too big of a venture. To avoid the first, I took a trusty person under whose eyes I had the experiments made, and I was fully convinced of the cheapness of these productions. Oh, this is just this text. As to the second, I referred to Monsieur de Zourmont, which is the name that Saint-Germain has taken, another name, another alias, to a good and trustworthy merchant at Tournai, with which he is working, and I have had advances made which mount up to very little through Netin, whose son and the son-in-law of Walquiers are the person who will carry on these manufactures. So he's going ahead with it. When the profits of the first experiments place us in a position to establish them without risking anything of our own, the moment for deriving the profit is already close at hand. So from another source also, we hear of Saint-Germain at Tournai, namely from the memoirs of Casanova. Casanova, on the road to Tournai, was informed of the presence of Monsieur le Comte de Saint-Germain and desired to be presented to him. Being told that le Comte received no one, he wrote to him to request an interview, which was granted under the restriction of coming incognito and not being invited to partake of food with him. Casanova found le Comte in the dress of an Armenian with a long beard. Wow, what a story. So there are more stories here. But I think this video is quite already a bit too long. So we'll break off here, but we've gone, the first part of the video, you know, our first subject matter about Francis Bacon and this wild conjecture and metaphysics and all that. And then at the end, we're discussing Saint-Germain's profound and deep knowledge of a very deep form of craftsmanship, which he's able to demonstrate through, you know, dyeing wood, dyeing skins, painting, fabrication, chemistry, alchemy. Quite interesting. The spectrum, the full spectrum of brilliance of the man. So we'll break off there, and I hope all is well.